Happy Wednesday, friends. I think I'm going to read tonight a story called Janet and Tamlin, which is one of my very favorite fairy tales of all time. I think primarily because it's about loving someone even when they may not exactly be themselves. This, according to my book, it says this story is from Scotland. I was always familiar with it as an Irish fairy tale, and the fact that it's the first line is Janet grew up near a Scotland forest, which is clearly a typo where someone inserted Scotland over Irish. So I'm going to make a correction, and we'll proceed with the story from there. Janet grew up near an Irish forest where it was believed the fairy folk dwelled. As a child, Janet obeyed her parents' request that she never enter the forest, but as she became a young lady, she couldn't resist exploring the forest for berries and flowers. One day, as she picked berries, enjoying the coolness of the woods, she was startled by the appearance of a young man. His warm smile disarmed her, and she fell into conversation with him, learning that his name was Tamlin. From that day on, Janet would return to the woods to stroll and visit with Tamlin. Their friendship grew, and Janet asked him to return home with her to meet her parents. "Ah, Janet," he replied, "I must tell you my sad story. When I was a child, I was stolen by the fairy folk. Though I am a mortal and I can walk the woods by day, the enchantment returns me to the fairyland by night." "So the fairy folk do exist?" "Oh, Tamlin, I am sorry that you are not free," said Janet. Though Janet knew their friendship could only exist in the woods, she became increasingly fond of Tamlin, and they continued to meet. One fall day, Janet saw that Tamlin was quite distressed. His eyes were sad, and his mouth was set. "What's wrong, Tam?" asked Janet. "Now you must learn the rest of my story. Every 7 years the fairy folk must pay the tand. They draw strength from the mortal they sacrifice to the spirits, and I am to be that mortal. That time is near," said Tamlin. "There must be a way to break the spell," Janet insisted. "There is a way, but it's very difficult. The spell is lifted so that I can leave the forest to go to the Circle of Stones. If someone who loves me can seize me during the procession and hold me for the time of 21 heartbeats, I shall be free of the fairies." "But Tam, this is wonderful, for I do love you. I will save you." "Janet, I love you as well, but the danger is so great that I fear for your life. Sam Eve is the night of the sacrifice, and wicked spirits will be roaming about. You will be at great risk, and when you seize me, the fairies will transform me so that you will yearn to release me. I could seem terrifying and threatening to you. You will possibly be in great pain." Janet took his hands and looked up at him with great courage and love. "I will set you free," she promised. As the days shortened and cooled, they continued to meet, but they became more and more pensive as Sam and Eve approached. Finally, the day arrived, and as the sun set, most of the people closed their homes, fearing the creatures that ruled the night. But Janet made her way unseen to the crossroads where Tamlin was to be. There she crouched, listening to the frightening night noises. At times she felt the air move nearby, and other times she glimpsed terrible creatures, but she remained unseen. Near midnight, aching from the wait, she finally heard the clinking of bridles, and she knew the fairy folk were coming. The procession was long, and the fairy folk were beautifully dressed for the ceremony. Finally, she spied Tamlin, who was dressed in a white robe, walking dispiritedly between two black-robed wizards. As he passed Janet, she sprung up and threw her arms around him. The procession halted in confusion. The wizards began to whisper their magical spells, and Tamlin changed. He snarled at her with the drooling fangs of the huge wolf he had become. "It's a trick," Janet told herself, and she held fast in spite of her terror. In a moment he had changed again. She realized her hands and arms were dripping with slime as a huge worm-like creature writhed in her grasp. She shook with horror, but she continued to hold on to the animal. Searing heat engulfed Janet as Tamlin turned into a glowing hot metal statue. Her teeth ached from clenching them against the pain, but she did not release Tam. Abruptly, the heat was replaced with coldness so fierce that it burned her skin just like before. While Janet held on, the cold statue became a huge bat, seemingly desperate to fly away. Janet closed her eyes, clutched its beating wings, and desperately wondered how much longer she could endure the bruising punishment. Suddenly, she heard the fairies weeping and screeching. The night was lit by a flash of light, and then all was quiet. Janet slowly opened her eyes and realized that she was no longer holding terrifying monsters. She was clinging to Tam Lin, once again in his mortal form. As he gently touched her face in thanks, she realized that she had truly broken the fairy's spell. The moon was low in the sky, and the forest was now quiet. Salmon Eve was over. Janet and Tam Lin walked quietly to Janet's home. They soon were married, but they never walked again in the nearby forest. And that's your fairy tale for tonight. Sleep tight, y'all.